AI agents are moving beyond tools into systems that can access environments, interpret data, and take action. For MSPs, that creates a new kind of insider risk that behaves more like a user than software. I'm joined by Nicole Reineke from Enable to talk about where that risk shows up and how MSPs can stay in control as AI adoption accelerates. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Now, Nicole, we're hearing a lot about AI agents right now. In simple terms, what are they and why should MSPs care?
Yeah, it's a great question. So AI agents can be broken down into something really straightforward. It is an object that has an identity. So there's a service that's running and it's a named thing. It's running in a runtime, so it can run on your local machine, it can run in the cloud, in a virtual machine. So it's a thing that runs with a name and it's connected to one or more data sources. And that data source can be a prompt that you type in, it could be databases, it can be the internet, right? So it is fed by some set of information and it follows an operating manual. And that operating manual can be as simple as a description saying, hey, always do something, or it can be as complex as something like a very big run book. And it uses a language model typically, or some model, to perform the connection between data and that operating manual to create an outcome. So it's a very straightforward concept that looks just a lot like software, but we throw the term AI agent around without context. So hopefully that gives you a little more context for what it really is.
Yeah, that's definitely a clear description. Thank you for that. Now, once agents can read data and make decisions, when do they move from being helpful to actually taking action?
Yeah, so that is the tools that you associate with an agent. So you can build agents that are just informative and they just read in information and they teach you things and tell you things. And when you connect a tool, so typically people do this through an MCP server, that tool will call into a series of API calls or it will call into another agent that can flip a switch, that could, run a script, that can, push a button for you quite literally. And that's the point at which it becomes an action taker, when something changes as the result of an outcome of that analysis.
Now, when that happens, how does risks start to get introduced?
Yeah. A lot of risk is introduced when people don't understand what the agent's going to do. So that's the first thing. When you create an agent, you want to create what are called guardrails. So really specific descriptions of what it can do and what it can't do. But it's not enough to just describe that as part of the operating manual. You also want to limit the data that it has access to. So as you're building out the definition of the agent and you link it to a folder or a data set, you want to be very specific with permissions that you give it up front. So ideally, you're connecting it to a data set or a database that is restricted by token access or key access. So you can actually say this logged in user, which is the agent at that point, can only ever access these 3 fields and only ever access these 4 API calls. And the further you restrict it, the better off you are. The danger comes in when we forget to do those little restrictions up front and we say, hey, let's connect an agent to our production database, because what could possibly go wrong? So that's really where that first line of danger happens, is when we don't properly restrict that connection in and the actions out.
Now, agents can behave more like users than software at times. What does that mean for how MSPs manage access and permissions?
Yeah, so you have to manage your agents exactly like you manage your employees. You really want to consider the task that you want the agent to do. And in many cases, we're building agents that act as if they're level 1 technicians. So read in ticket information, bring in additional data from additional sources, and then determine what you want to do. So you want to literally restrict the information the agent has access to, just like you would restrict an employee. And then you want to give very, very explicit operating manuals to that agent. So if you imagine you're hiring a student right out of college, you would tell them exactly how to do their job and exactly how to do troubleshooting. You want to replicate that in the form of an operating manual. or a run book, which can be read in by that agent. So you have a much higher likelihood of the agent being able to succeed. So we really want to follow all of the restriction paths of permissions plus all of the training paths of what you would give to a new employee trying to do the exact same job.
Now, many MSPs are already using agents in some form. Where is that happening today, even if they don't realize it?
Yeah, the most common use is they've purchased a product that actually has AI agents built in. Enable is a great example of that. So inside our N-Central and Nsight products, we have an agent orchestrator called Enzo. And Enzo is a highly restricted, highly governed set of agents underneath the cover, but you can go in and you can ask it questions, and it has a very specialized operating manual with very restricted access to data and a service identity that is based on your permissions that will actually go out and research and perform activities on your behalf. So you're probably using agents in someone else's software if you're not just building them yourselves yet.
Now, as agents connect to logs, endpoints, and customer environments, where does insider style risk start to show up?
Yeah, so agents have access to a lot of information. If you are familiar with Mythos and with Glasswing, what we know is the more information you have about what components make up software, the more likely it is that you can exploit those components. And so there is really this whole risk surface that appears when you give agents access to more and more information. Log files can accidentally reveal package names, for example. And if you know the package names, you can also understand what components of the software make up a software package. So we really want to be careful about what the instructions are and the kind of information it has access to, and give it least privilege access wherever you can.
Now, we've heard stories about agents behaving in unexpected ways. How real are those risks right now?
So real. Every day. My favorite are the stories about, this is probably shouldn't be my favorite, but it is. The stories about people who give agents unrestricted access to things like GitHub. And they show up one morning after the agents run overnight and their entire repository has been deleted or overwritten. Right. So the threat of human error plus agent overextending their permission set and what they want to do is very real, and we're seeing things in the news every day. So it's both, internal human error and attack surface error, where the agents are actually being weaponized themselves to go do bad things on purpose.
Now, Nicole, that shift happened very fast. Why did agent driven systems take off so quickly?
I had the same question. So I teach AI and innovation at Georgetown as my evening job, and I saw this happen over a period of 12 months. So 12 months ago, the majority of my students were just using a language model to process some information, and then they were copying and pasting it out. And by September, the majority of my students had actually put AI in line, so data would come in, AI would process it, and it would come out. And then what happened, and it was really January specifically, the majority of my students had flipped from I have AI processing some data to I actually have AI agents that are reading in data and then turning it into a signal that I can take action against. And when I investigated the reason for this adoption, because there is high risk, it was that exact moment when they realized they could take information in that's not well structured and that's not necessarily normalized, and an agent can actually bring it to a form of normalization that they can create directional accuracy out of it. And that value is so significant that it forced, on many of these students, it forced their adoption of it in production environments. Then, once they had that near normalized or directionally accurate information, how they realized how easy it was to just extend the agent capabilities or add on additional agents that took that directional signal and then turned it into a next step. So they really just made it so much easier for everybody without software engineering backgrounds to turn massive amounts of information into signals that we can take action against. That's significant value across the board.
And you have to adopt or else you're going to get left behind, right?
Correct, right. Once you realize your competitors are doing it, you have not a whole lot of choice.
Now, we know things are getting harder at the edge. What makes endpoint and device level agents more difficult to control?
When you're dealing with edge devices, you have a logged in user that typically has significant amount of access to the resources on their endpoint device. You also have access to data that isn't necessarily well labeled and probably isn't put in the right folders. So you get a twofold response. The first is those agents likely have access to sensitive information that isn't being stored where it should be because they have access to your entire desktop. And the second is they have unfettered access to the internet and not a whole lot of control over those guardrails. Because when people are doing things on Cloud Desktop and with Cloud Cowork or even Microsoft Copilot Cowork, they can do fairly destructive things in a local environment without any oversight. And when you do things in a central location, like if we're running all of our agents through Bedrock, there is oversight and guardrails that come as part of Bedrock. So we can do a lot more. We can do a lot more monitoring and control over those centralized agents. Whereas within your own local environment, I know I have caused complete havoc on my local system, and I think other people with the same level of curiosity and access have done the same thing. So it really is about decentralizing that control.
Now, Nicole, with all of that in mind, what does practical AI governance look like before agents are allowed to act?
Yeah, we can proactively put in place governance with some really simple things. The first thing is we document everything, right? Simply by saying, I understand what's in my environment, I know what it's trying to do, and I can explain it to other people. That's the first level of governance and control. The second level is all about understanding ownership. So every agent that exists needs to have a human owner that oversees it, that gives it a life cycle, that gives it an expiration date, and understands and goes back and monitors when that agent is no longer doing the job it was intended to do. So we can put those two things in place immediately. We can also put in place, some rules around the context that we allow as an organization. So at Enable, we have very clear guidelines on the context or why and where we will allow AI utilization. And that is to make sure that our customers are protected and also that we are protected as employees and as citizens of the AI universe. And then you can add on top of that communication plans and communication strategies. So when you are using AI, it is necessary to communicate that out to your customers, especially if you're making decisions based on their data. So we have really clear communication plans that we can put in place and understand what is meaningful to the end users, what do they need to know, when do they need to know it, and we can simply communicate that out. So being very clear in what our intents are, documenting everything, assigning ownership for everything, and then communicating effectively. And that's going to protect you 90% of the time. And so regardless of what comes out, as long as your intentions are good and your documentation is clear and you have audit trails for everything, you will proactively be compliant with a lot of what is coming out as part of the regulations.
Such helpful information, Nicole. Now, for MSPs watching this and wanting to go deeper, where's the best place for them to learn more and get started?
Yeah, we have an AI Governance 101 book that we've put out in conjunction with legal teams. So it's really quite an incredible resource. I highly recommend it, completely free. So it's AI Governance 101 by Enable. You can just look up my name and download it for free.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us and sharing such clear and practical guidance on what AI agents mean for MSPs today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you at home for watching. For the Channel Company, I'm Kenna Johnson.